because these kids with the autism, there seems to be a sort of a disconnect with their body that is going on inside their head. And the little boy, when I went to try to pray over him and touch him, he was resistant to it. He didn't want to have anyone touching him. They don't like certain feelings of fabric on their skin. And part of the reason may be is normal adults, normal humans only use about 5% of their brain. Now this has been mapped by studies going on, for a long, long time, that we've underused so much of our brain capacity. Except when you get to these autistic kids. And then there seems to be more brain is being activated than what is happening maybe in their parents or siblings who are considered to be normal. So when these children are doing their processing of information, they are not so connected to the body, I think, because their mind is working at such an advanced pace than maybe the rest of us might be working at. I don't know if they're working overtime to get to the same conclusion, or they're out there working on different things altogether that we're not aware of. I don't know. But one of the things that came out of my discussion with this clinical psychologist who said that I had a bit of autism in my evidence as she watched the videos and trying to understand some of the constructs that I was coming up with and talking about. She started talking about how these children are really so advanced that we don't understand. And she said that in her studies over 35 years of doing this, that she has come to know that many of these children, when they seem to be checked out and not engaging with anyone else in the room, and many times when they're in bed and quietly sleeping or just resting, that so many of these children with autism around the world have been able to communicate one way or another, sometimes have these talk boxes and things like that, that kids, depending on their spectrum place on the autism range, can communicate in different ways than verbally. And that so many of these children, as she has reviewed them and studied them, have reported that they go to the hill. What hill? Well, it's not a physical hill. It's a hill that exists in a different realm, if you will. These children are apparently being transported some way, whether it be telepathically or mind-body experience, change out, an out-of-body experience, which I've experienced. But when these children are reporting going to the hill, their bodies are still in the bed, but their mind is at the hill. And when they're at this hill, they are conversing with other children from all over. And they're learning and exchanging information in a very pleasant and serene area where they all are safe. But all these children with autism are showing up at this place called the hill that they describe. And they all describe it basically the same as rolling green meadows and, gently sloping hills, that it's peaceful, there's no antagonism, there's no threats. It's always sunny, it's always, beautiful there, and it's always friendly, and it's always loving. And they all look forward to seeing each other at the hill. How is this happening? How can something like that be happening? Well, I have to think about how in the books of the mystical city of God, how Mary talks about how she was communicating with her infant son, Jesus, immediately after his birth. Now, Jesus is God, and Mary understood that, but I don't believe Jesus was speaking normally at the age of 2 months, 3 months, 8 months. Word skills hadn't come along in his natural path. although he was God, he could have been doing anything. But I believe what was happening is there's this telepathic communication that was going on through the assistance of the Holy Spirit, God, helping facilitate Jesus' earthly mother, Mary, maybe Joseph too, I don't know. I don't know if that was in the book or not, of telepathically communicating with each other. I mean, Mary could be speaking, spoken words, and Jesus would understand as a child. But for Mary to understand Jesus, who didn't have spoken words yet, it might answer a few questions here. So with the assistance of the Holy Spirit, it seems that children in their autistic states around the world are being moved to a safe place where they can communicate, whether it be telepathically or whatever. I don't know and haven't been there. Still doing some research on this. But this woman told me that with almost 97% accuracy, as far as everyone that she had studied on it, that about 97% of the population of children she had studied with autism had reported some form of the hill in their dialogue with other people, clinicians, parents, whatever. And this is kind of interesting, if nothing else. And this might be, in a way, how heaven introduces the communion of souls, communion of saints in heaven, that with no physical body, that they're communicating with this sort of understood relationship, in whether it be telepathically or just innately knowing when you become part of this thing. I've always said that heaven is a place where everyone agrees because everybody knows. Nobody has faith in heaven. They all know. They don't believe it anymore because they're there. They know. This is it. So it takes a lot of questions of faith or questions of fact out of the equation because everybody knows, everybody agrees, everybody's happy, content. They're in the Spirit. They're with God. That's a kind of cool feeling to have. But all these children relating, this experience at the hill. And there was one case she talked about where a child had been aphasic and couldn't speak. And then one day, the child started speaking. The family was English speaking, and there was, just not a lot of anything that instigated this child to start speaking. But when the child started speaking, the child didn't speak English. The child was speaking perfect Portuguese. How does that happen? Well, the child related that he had learned to speak Portuguese at the hill. Children that were there, he'd met some Portuguese children, and they had been teaching him Portuguese. Strange but true? Maybe. I don't know. But it might explain a few other things we can talk about. This doctor also explained to me that a lot of these children, with about a 70% rating from people that she had actually dealt with, possessed mind-reading capabilities. And they were able to read the minds of their parents or caregivers or folks that were, close to them, that they developed a relationship with them, and these were people that were around them, and these kids were able to trust. And then they had this ability to read their minds. And so they tested this in a clinical situation, and about 70% accuracy, these kids were reading their parents' minds or even that of the clinician who was doing the study on them. The kids would not know what the next question was going to be, but before the person could ask it or put the materials out there, the kid was already answering the question. Spooky? Maybe not. There was other things that were going on with this mind-reading capability. She had one student, I guess, or patient, if you will, or kid, who was blind. I think it was a little girl this one. I'm not certain, but this person they were studying was blind, and so what they did was they put a screen, and they put the child on one side of the screen, and then the parent on the other side of the screen, and then in front of the parent they put an eye chart like your regular ophthalmologist would use, and so they had this eye chart up there. The kid couldn't see it. The kid was blind, but not knowing if it was perfectly blind, they wanted to ensure that by putting this wall down between there to make sure that the child couldn't see what was being read. Well, as the parent would be looking at the screen, the kid would be typing out on their communication device the letters that were on the chart perfectly. So this kid was looking through their parents' eyes and reading their mind as to what these letters were. And she said the kid nailed every letter on the chart. I said, how did that make you feel? She says, well, I knew I was onto something, and I knew that this kid wasn't alone. Then she went on to tell me about a project, I think it was back after the end of World War II. And a lot of our intelligence gathering swept in on the Nazi regime and the medical and the other what we would call investigative research teams that were going on around Germany at that time. And they had a mind reading exercise going on, as did the U.S. and other countries. We're all looking into this paranormal mind reading type of stuff. Well, the Germans had really gotten into it, and they had spent an awful lot of time and money on this stuff. So the U.S. brought a lot of this stuff back here, and they were going to test things here on this shore and try to see what was going on with this. So they did Project Pegasus, and a lot of people are dying out that were in that Project Pegasus, the scientists, the people doing the studies and things like that. And as they're dying, they're talking to try to get things off of their conscience. And these were tightly held secrets by the government. And a lot of people say, well, this is all conspiracy. Well, it might be, but it might also have a bit of truth to it. And this is where we have to look into this. Well, Project Pegasus was trying to use these autistic children and adults. And they were doing all sorts of experiments with them. And they were trying to see if they couldn't use these powers of mind reading that these kids seem to be exhibiting to help them achieve, whether it be strategic goals with military defense, using it as weaponization to understand what the enemies might be thinking, all these kind of things. Well, the doctors got really, really frustrated. And why did they get frustrated? Well, they were trying to use Project Pegasus to do less than lofty goals. They had some poor intent. I don't know if it was evil, but they had poor intent. It wasn't lifting people up. It wasn't looking to benefit people as much as try to control them or use them or some of these other nefarious types of goals. Until one of these clinicians turned the tables around. And what they did was they tried to use this mind reading for good, and to see if it would turn these kids on, if they tried to get them to offer help to people in need, that people were quietly suffering. Maybe other autistic kids, maybe people in a different area or different, kind of problem that weren't voicing what their particular, struggles were. When they turned it around to try to do good, the kids were like 100% effective. I mean, 100%. It was just amazing how effective things just turned around. And so what the clinicians and the scientists basically determined was that there's something there, but it isn't going to give them what they want out of it, which was to be able to use things for nefarious means to try to control people, put them down. But when they let it go to do what the Holy Spirit wanted to do, which was to build, create, and lift people up, not destroy, the kids were successful. Or the kids were always successful. It's just the people doing the studies were the ones who had to determine if this is what they wanted or were looking for, if they could use this. Well, apparently the Holy Spirit in these tests had his own ideas about how this should work, and that this is also a sign that heaven, through the Holy Spirit, does not do evil, will not do bad. And so we have to lay our swords down so much and pick up, the palm, so to speak. We need to try to take care of one another in this regard. And I think this was really kind of cool that Project Pegasus failed, but was successful because it helped have people more understanding about what's going on with these kids. Now, it doesn't explain why there's so much more of it. I've got some other, thoughts that might be as to why they're trying to do this. If anyone's trying to do it and create it, we don't know. This could be something that's a natural effect of these genetically modified foods. This could be something that's happening with vaccines. You just don't really know. But when you start fucking around with God's natural plan, you got to expect that there's going to be some problems come out of it. So you can't just assume that everything's going to work out perfectly when you start messing around with God. So this is kind of where we're at. I think it's very, very interesting. I'm looking at the data that she had shared with me about her diagnosis of me being on the autism spectrum, but it doesn't really bother me if I were, because I understand that you could be highly functioning and still have some instances of this in you that makes you maybe more capable of certain things, not to the detriment of others. But, we'll see where this all goes. But I just find this incredibly interesting, and I want to share it with you. But if you want to do more research on this on your own, all you really have to do is to search autism and the Hill. And you may get some fluffy type stories on it, but you never know. You may find some information out there that might be adaptable for you and your thinking, but I find it incredibly interesting, and I can't wait for Alex to get back in here so that we can talk about this a little bit more, because Alex has background in this field of clinical psychology. And so I can't wait to get his response on some of this stuff to see where this goes. So in the meantime, I love you, and I'll be back.